You are listening to Kubernetes Bytes, a podcast bringing you the latest from the world of cloud-native data management. My name is Ryan Wallner, and I'm joined by Bhavin Shah, coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. We'll be sharing our thoughts on recent cloud-native news and talking to industry experts about their experiences and challenges managing the wealth of data in today's cloud-native ecosystem. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. We're coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. Today is August 16th, 2023. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. Let's dive into it. So, first episode back since our little summer break. That was enjoyable. I hope you enjoyed it too, Bhavin. How's it going for you?
It was a good break. I'm still like while I was prepping for this episode, I was like, how do we do this again? It was just like one episode that we skipped. So
It's not muscle memory by now.
it kind of is, but like this ended up being like a 101 episode, right? So it like
More pressure on you
more
to know what you're talking about.
not
There
just
you
me, like us, but just figure out like this needs more research and more work, because we're not just coming up with questions and understanding the topic, but we're also trying to be the experts to talk about it. So fun times. But yeah, I had a good summer break. I know we spoke about like where I was headed to. Went to Banff National Park over in Alberta,
Nice.
Canada. I had to put that in there.
The most terrible Canadian accent, A.
Yep. No, it was fun. Like I didn't expect it to be like very touristy, but it
Sure.
was. It ended up being a long weekend in Canada. The weekend I was there, so
That probably didn't help.
yeah, didn't help. But overall, like it was fun. Like national park trips are always like wake up like 5 a.m. in the morning, go out there to find parking spots for hikes, do day hikes. Way to avoid the crowds as well. It's so pretty, dude. Like it's awesome. Like it's.
I really do want to make it there someday soon. I've heard a lot of good things. Now I'm jealous that you've been.
I know it's amazing.
What was your favorite thing that you did there?
So a couple of hikes that were good, but then I think going to Lake Moraine in the morning, just after sunrise, getting that golden light, it was just amazing. Like I can see the reason why they had it printed on their $10 or $20 note for the longest period.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just it was amazing. Like it was serene. Like
did you bring a nice camera? Do you have one that you like can capture those moments with?
Yeah, I do have a Canon EOS R, so I can take some pictures. I don't call myself as an expert when it comes to taking photos.
It'll save the memory for you.
Yeah. Better than an iPhone photo. I think, like, I love my iPhone, but like, I realize that when I go to these national parks and take pictures, and eventually if I want to blow them up and like put frames of it, like clearly,
one day they'll be a picture there.
I realize that the iPhone pictures, when you blow it up, like become really blurry. That's why I was like, okay, I need to buy a camera that at least can help me capture.
Yeah, and you can have a little more control over all the settings and everything, and really get the picture you want. Yeah, you have to be into it though. I feel like if you don't enjoy that process of capturing an image or like messing with camera settings, it's just you probably just won't do it.
Yeah,
which is fine too, because then you just keep it in your head, and that counts as well. I think.
True. How was your break, Ryan?
It was pretty good. I have this. I won't hold up my finger.
Oh, nice.
For listening, but because it's my middle finger. But I injured my middle finger on a dirt bike trip. Well, changing a tire. It wasn't even. It wasn't even riding. So it's. I tore an extensor tendon in the top of my finger, which basically just makes your finger just like permanently move forward like that. So you have to wear this for 6 weeks. And a little suture action there.
Wow.
The nice part is it's a wet cast, so I can take it on and off and clean it and those kind of things. So like there's a lot worse things that can happen. And it's like, you want your fingers to work properly, but it still feels like kind of a wussy injury, But I found out I had the issue on the trail. So the guy I was with made a splint out of 2 butter knives that we had.
Nice.
So I was riding back to like urgent care with butter knives on my fingers, just like Edward Scissorhands running down the road. I quickly replaced that once I reached a civilization that had a CVS. But
man, I'm glad that was the only injury on your trip. Like it was a week-long thing, right? So
Exactly. Yeah, it was still a lot of fun. We had really good weather, which always helps. It's been raining a ton, so we were a little nervous, but
I know.
did rain one night and thunderstorm overnight. I don't know if you've ever been like camping in a tent when it's just like pouring rain and thunderstorming, but I find it very peaceful, which is, I don't know, maybe different than what other people would
Oh,
think, but I like slept like a baby.
okay.
Not that a baby would sleep very well in a tent, but the point is, I slept very well during the, the rainstorm. Saw a bear jump out in front of
Oh,
us.
wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was a whole thing.
Nice.
Yeah, if you're into that kind of thing.
Yeah,
But
I didn't see a bear in Banff National Park. You saw one on your dirt bike trip. Come on, man.
in Western New York,
Yeah.
it was a small black bear, probably different than the ones you'd
That
see in
counts, dude. Like anything counts.
Yeah, so otherwise I enjoyed it. But yeah, now we're diving back into the podcast, which is, it's nice to be back. I don't know.
I know.
We'll see. So today's topic is presented by Bhavin and I. We have some guests lined up coming forward, but we're kind of easing our way back into it.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about Kubernetes observability, specifically from sort of that high level point of view. These episodes that we do to kind of give an overview, sort of a 101 view of the market and some use cases and those kind of things. But we'll dive into some things, ask each other some questions. But before we do that, we'll have some news. What rounds do you have for us today, Bob?
No, like news, right? It's been a while, so we do have a few articles that we can share.
Yeah.
Starting with Kubernetes 128. I know, like, we really like 127 and chill vibes, but now we have a new contender, Planternetis. Planternetis?
Planternetis.
Yeah, like maybe I think the release lead was fan of indoor plants. But yeah, fun name. It just came out yesterday on August
Yeah.
the 15th.
On time, I heard too.
Yeah,
Original date. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm just glad that this is like they now have like 3 releases a year instead of 4. So there is time for people to like plan for upgrades and actually upgrade things and more enhancements and things like that. So this one has 45 different enhancements, 19 are entering alpha, 14 graduated to beta, and 12 have graduated to stable. There have been some removals and deprecations, things like I think the Ceph RBD and Ceph FS in tree CSI plugins are deprecated. There are a lot of enhancements, and to be honest, like I didn't read through all of those. There was only one that was kind of related to storage, around like, oh, if you have a default storage class set after from a day 2 perspective, it will take into effect as well. That feature was already there in beta. Now it has been graduated, and that's the only enhancement I had to talk about.
Is that the recovery one from non-graceful shutdown, or is that a different one?
That's a different one, but yeah, that's
that
also
one sort of relates to storage too, because it kind of affects how things, PVCs get detached and things like that.
True.
But that one's GA as well. So
yeah, it is.
Other good news.
Nice.
I was going to ask you if you had your top picks from enhancements, but I won't since you.
Thank you.
You read them.
I appreciate that. And then I think going back to like funding rounds and acquisition section, right? Like Sweet Security. Again, that's the name of the company. Like today we have companies that have some awesome names. Sweet Security raises $12 million in seed funding. So they are building a cloud native security solution based out of Israel. The co-founders had worked for the Israel Defense Forces, which I think at some point in your career, everybody in Israel has to go through the military training exercise, but they are building solutions for cloud native, heavily relying on eBPF to monitor traffic, and then building I think they want to use this funding to grow out their team and then help with automatic remediation. So there are so many tools that give you what's wrong with your cluster, but these guys want to take it a step further and like, okay, this is how we'll fix it for you. Like, just give us some permissions and then we'll fix it. It's still in early stages, right? It's still a seed round, so they're still looking to find that product market fit. But we have another vendor in the already crowded cloud native security ecosystem.
Yeah, that space in CNCF landscape is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the only one bigger is like the actual Kubernetes providers themselves.
Yeah.
Right? But the security ones, there's just like, you could definitely get lost in there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and everybody has like an open source version. I know we spoke to Mondu, they have CNSpec. We spoke to Armo guys, they have Kubescape. Aqua Security has Trivi. Like all these vendors have an open source project, and then they have an enterprise or a paid version as well. So
I think it shows kind of where the market is too, and where people need these
the most help.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of companies, a lot of startups kind of are tackling that space because there's a need, right? Obviously, I think we've covered that numerous times on the show as well. So I think it's cool.
Yeah. And like, let's talk about the acquisition that you found, which also has an interesting name.
Which is also sort of tied-ish to somewhat, I guess you could kind of tie it to security a little bit, but yeah, middleware raised 6.5 million in seed funding, but they're going at the observability and AI space. So like all the things we'll maybe talk about today in terms of observability that are important are kind of tying that to generative AI, and kind of making it, the realization that it's very complex, and there's a lot of things moving, and the space is really scaling, and these clusters can be quite complex. The AI part of it, I think we're seeing a lot of smaller companies come out with the AI tie, and that kind of rhymes, but
I know.
we'll see lots more of it, I'm sure.
I'm just like amazed that they call themselves middleware, and
Yeah,
then
I think sweet security wins today.
yup.
Middleware might be at the bottom.
But they like middleware folks got the domain middleware.io. Like,
Yeah.
okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's it's a very common word. Maybe does that make it tougher to have good SEO or
I
bad?
know. Oh, that's true. Okay. We'll find out when they reach Series A how good they are. But yeah.
Exciting times though.
Okay. Moving on, I think an acquisition. So Dynatrace acquired a startup called Rookout to add to their observability scenario. I don't know, for some reason we decided on this topic, and then everything I see around in the ecosystem has something to do with observability. So I think that will help Dynatrace build out their portfolio and go after cloud native customers as
It's
well.
like when you buy a car, you see it everywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Or when you are thinking about buying a car, like I drove a BMW X3 in Canada, and then
Nice.
there's a whole story behind it why that happened. But now in Boston, like, oh, BMW X3, I didn't know there were so many X3s around.
It happens. Yeah. Rookout. Yeah, well, I don't know much about them, but I was looking at them the other day in the observability space as well.
Yeah,
Debugging.
I think we need a deep dive on what each of these vendors do. Obviously, there will be some overlap, but there needs to be some form of.
You want your brain to explode.
Yeah.
Then get a deep dive on every one of these companies.
True. Nice. And then a couple of just small updates. Acuity, the Argo CD, enterprise Argo CD company, they have now launched an AI assistant to help troubleshoot common Kubernetes deployment issues. So they're obviously helping customers build the CD part of their pipelines. They saw a few common troubleshooting issues, and then like, let's have an AI chatbot or an AI assistant that can help resolve those. So if you're already using Acuity, I think something that you can check out. I guess
AI tie.
Yeah, an AI tie.
What comes into mind is like the memes with Oprah just being like, "You get an AI, you get an AI, you get an AI."
I know, agreed. And then talking about AI, let's also talk about the predecessor to AI, like ML and ML Ops, which was a buzz before Gen AI, I guess. Kubeflow, the project to run machine learning workloads on Kubernetes, is now accepted as an incubating project into CNCF. So I think it was managed. I think the biggest contributor to that project was Google Cloud, and now they've officially submitted it to CNCF, similar to what they've done with Istio and other projects. So adding another, I think this is the 38th project inside CNCF. So the landscape just keeps increasing, or the projects that CNCF manages keeps increasing.
Absolutely.
And then finally, our friends at EDB announced new services from a managed database service perspective with Google Cloud. So they have something called as let me remember if I remember. Let me look at my notes because it was a different name. So yeah, fully managed database as a service called EDB Big Animal on GKE standard, and then they have a community version like EDB Community 360 Postgres on GKE Autopilot and GKE standard. All of these are available on Google Cloud as of yesterday. So if you are using EDB on Google Cloud, you have new services to check out.
Big animal.
Yeah. But that's it for the news, like cloud native news for me, Ryan.
Nice. Now the naming today, sweet security and big animal. I mean, I dig it. I think.
Yeah.
So I already talked about the middleware one for me. I just have a couple more.
Yeah.
One is Nutanix, who we've talked about on this podcast and prior. They have an article here about putting ChatGPT or GPT in a box on the platform. So another AI tie.
I looked at the architecture or a higher level diagram. It was just like, okay, they can run Kubernetes on their HCI stack, and now they can help you deploy your models on that stack, and that's it. That's GPT in a box for you.
GPT in a box, tied to their GPU acceleration stuff,
Yeah.
and with Carbon, and it ties in well for them. I think. I
Mhm.
think again we'll see a lot of this kind of type of thing going forward, as a lot of people are asking for it. So
Yep.
the other one was around Aqua,
Mhm.
another security tie, not an AI tie, but really just talking about sort of the default configurations again, clusters being kind of put there out there on the internet, with things like accepting all IPs and from anywhere to access those kind of things. And again, I think it just goes to show you, Bhavin, you mentioned before, the security CNCF landscape is huge,
Yeah.
and but constantly we get articles like this every week
Mhm.
about many companies falling sort of prey to these these things that can be misconfigured, and these tools I think are going to be something that everyone has to take
Yeah.
seriously very quickly.
And like, regardless of what tool you are using, please don't allow 0.0.0.0 for incoming traffic. Like, that's a bad idea, regardless of whether you're using Kubernetes or not using Kubernetes. That's a big no-no.
Yeah, for certain things, especially
Yeah.
like the Kubernetes API
Yeah.
itself. Yes.
Yep.
But anyway, those are all the news articles I think between us for this week,
Yeah.
and we can jump into our topic. Again, no guest to introduce other than introducing ourselves. Which, if you don't know us, hi.
I
Um,
I love that.
and thank you for listening. But today we're going to be talking about Kubernetes observability. Again, this is sort of a mile wide, foot deep topic. We do this every now and then with a
Mhm.
Kubernetes topic, and then we kind of dig in and have people on the show that tie into this space. So today is observability, and it's a loaded term. So I'm going to ask you the question, Bobbin. What is Kubernetes observability to you?
Okay, so I have a textbook definition, and then I have like, okay, how does it differentiate from monitoring, so to make it easier? Because when I was like this, not right now, but when observability started making a buzz around in like 2017 2018 timeframe, I was like, how is this different? Because at that time you had monitoring, which
Yeah,
infrastructure folks and infrastructure teams were already using as a solution or as a thing to monitor their infrastructure stacks and
sure.
applications.
Yeah.
Observability was coming around, AI ops was coming around. So like all of these new buzzwords, like what was observability in the first place? So the textbook definition is observability refers to the ability to monitor and diagnose the performance and behavior of your Kubernetes cluster and applications. Doesn't seem that different, right? Like, it's just like, okay, monitoring and diagnosing. But it
Yeah, always something that's been important. Like
yeah.
the observability term, like you said, did just kind of take off, but it's not like it's new,
Yeah.
right? These are just like it's lumped together in something that's very important in Kubernetes. But
Yeah.
continue.
No, and I like the way, like, I know we are not talking about any specific vendors, but like Honeycomb, right? That's one of the big vendors in the observability ecosystem. They define observability as having like three distinct characteristics to just help you understand the way your infrastructure stacks or the way your systems are functioning. The first one being high cardinality. So like, just understanding this, like if you have a key value pair, high cardinality just means that your values can be in the thousands or millions of entries, so the possible different combination. uh, like, let's say, for example, if you have a database, right, the key is social security number, and then the values can be any possible combination of the 10 digit or 9 digit SSNs that people in the US have. So that means
Mhm.
a solution has high cardinality. The second characteristic is around high dimensionality. So, which means that even your keys can have so many different values for a specific attribute. So, if we put this together, right, cardinality means you have so many different columns in that table, whereas the high dimensionality means you have so many different rows in that specific table that relates to a specific attribute. And then the third distinct characteristic is just being exploratory, which means the ability to explore your data in real time and ask arbitrary questions. I think this is where I want to take the segue into like the difference between monitoring and observability. But like, let me ask you, like, do you have anything to add before I go on to the next thing?
Yeah, well, and to your point, right? I think the way I've always talked about and thought about observability, I think coming from like working on platform engineering
Yeah.
teams, DevOps teams, is I always was trying to understand the application, the system, because whatever end user I was serving, the end customer, right? I was trying to solve problems that they had or we had, right? So things slowing down or things issues that came up, and really, so the definitions that I like are more around observability is having the means to be able to troubleshoot issues quickly, and it's very broad. Right. Because so is observability. Because what does it mean to be able to troubleshoot those issues quickly? Well, you need to be able to put your eyes on the right spots when it comes to all the signals and logs and metrics and traces, and that's all part of observability, right? So at the end of the day, why do you care about observability? Well, you're kind of to try to solve and improve many aspects, whether that's performance or customer issues, those kind of things. So I took a really good definition from Signos. That I found. They have a good article. I'll post it in the show links, but they have observability is Kubernetes is the means and ability to troubleshoot issues quickly and help with the help of collected telemetry, metrics, logs, traces, and having the visibility for your clusters. So I kind of gravitate toward that side of the definition, maybe because of just the background I have, but that's where I land.
Okay. So now let's talk about the difference between monitoring and observability. And the reason I'm dying to answer this question is because I have a really good a story or a metaphor to
then metaphor away.
So if you do a quick Google search, right, there are so many articles that will talk about the difference. At the end of the day, it is the difference. Like monitoring is all about the known unknowns. You know that you want to monitor X, Y, and Z, and then you are just waiting for alerts or things that just get generated. But whereas observability is about unknown unknowns, like you don't even know what you should know. I think that's where observability comes in. Sure. So the metaphor is this, right? Like if you go to a doctor's office, monitoring is just like they have a board in front of them. They're like, okay, they check your weight, they check your blood pressure, they check your pulse and things like that. They're just following a list of things that they know they should check maybe at your annual checkup. But observability is doctor actually starts by asking the hard questions like what hurts, and then tries to do a root cause analysis and doesn't leave anything, doesn't stick to a specific list, but just keeps digging into okay, what hurts? Your arm hurts. Why does it hurt? When did it start? What happened? And just figuring out the root cause of why your arm hurts. I think that's observability, and the ability to have all of that data readily available. So you as the administrator can ask those questions for your systems. So it can help you perform that root cause analysis and help you catch something or treat something before it becomes too serious.
Yeah, monitoring could almost be looked at as sort of the medical evidence that's supporting whatever observation the doctor's making at that point, right? If you say that you've been doing a lot of working out and now your arm hurts, well, you've told the doctor this, but now he's putting it all together or something.
I guess. And but if you didn't if you didn't start with asking these random unknown what questions, you wouldn't even figure out that your arm hurts by just looking at your weight and looking at your blood pressure. It's just if you were only monitoring for certain metrics, you will miss out the bigger picture, or you will miss out what's actually wrong with you or wrong with your infrastructure for that matter.
And I think that's kind of the notes I put in there too, was less on the metaphor side of it, but it tracks really well. So is really monitoring is just the technique of collecting, right? And you have a lot of unknowns in this, but you're collecting them, you're putting them somewhere, and now you need to be beyond what you do with just monitoring and collecting all that is where you get the value of observability, which is more the overall sort of tooling and technique about what you do with a lot of the things that you're monitoring. I think observability for me and sort of an approach is you have observability up top, monitoring sort of a subset, and then you can go even deeper right into those specific things that you're actually monitoring and what you do with them.
Yep, and agreed, right? There is definitely overlap. Monitoring is a huge subset of what observability is. You can't just have observability and ignore monitoring. That's not even possible. As we'll talk about what are the different components. I know in your definition you spoke about the metrics, traces, and logs thing. That's metrics is monitoring. You're collecting for specific metrics.
Yeah, exactly.
So they are closely tied to each other, but I think there is a lot of confusion in the industry, and like personally that metaphor helped me understand, like, okay, this is the difference.
Yeah. The metrics and the logs, like, and all these things that go into monitoring. These are just the things that you are, right? And ideally, you don't really box yourself in within your platform of what you can start to monitor, right? I think the challenge is you'll have plenty to monitor, but making useful observations out of that is a challenge, right? And just visualizing what you're monitoring is also not necessarily helpful, because a dashboard that may just visualize what you're monitoring is not that useful, right? Unless it's actually helping you solve some sort of other problem.
Like if your end user is experiencing some additional lag or performance degradation on their end device when they're trying to talk to your server, you need observability to figure out, like, okay, what's wrong, and analyze the traces and things like that.
Exactly. And I think this leads to sort of why observability in general is important, right? We're starting to talk about visualization, and obviously, from the human eye, having metrics stored in a huge, database somewhere is not that useful. Mm-hmm. I mean, it can be, but you'll have to do a lot of like queries and searches and all that so visualizing. So it leads to sort of why it's important to these teams that are starting to manage Kubernetes and manage the applications. Maybe you have an answer for that.
Yeah, I have a few bullet points, right, based on the research that I did. Like, as you said, right, visualization. So it definitely helps increase visibility for those DevOps, platform engineers, any XYZ persona. It helps you get a comprehensive view of your cluster to make it easier for these personas to understand how different components of their infrastructure and application stack are performing and identify potential issues. This in turn helps improve the performance of your application. So it helps you identify bottlenecks. So like it's I think in the Phoenix project, it's right. There was a statement that Bill made, right? Like, if you're not fixing the bottleneck, anything else that you're doing is not even like helping you. Obviously, I'm like, this is not the exact quote. I'm just paraphrasing it, but helping identify bottlenecks in your system and then helping you fix those bottlenecks is definitely a thing that observability can bring to your table. And this in turn leads to like better troubleshooting and better reliability. Like, okay, if you have to, let's say, perform root cause analysis, right? Like if you're seeing from Android devices, if you are seeing that you're not able to, like users that are using Android, your app on an Android device are not seeing better performance compared to iPhone users, you can actually break down that traffic and then troubleshoot better and identify things that you can fix in your system, and maybe scale out the pods that are responsible, maybe fix the routes or the ingress endpoints that you have for those applications communicating to your backend system. So definitely helps with better troubleshooting. We can also extend this and talk about security, right? Like if you know what's going on in your system, you can fix it better rather than you being oblivious and ignorant. Like ignorance is bliss, but not when it comes to your day job or managing your infrastructure. That can come back to bite you in the butt.
There's definitely a security component, right? I mean, just having visibility, which is a big part of observation of even just like requests being all of a sudden we have requests coming in from this endpoint that we have no idea, it's not on our network, all these things. You can investigate that, right? There's tools that are help you kind of identify those things on the fly and enable you, but this is a core tenet of being able to do those kind of things. And at the end of the day, for me, right, you're trying to solve a real problem, right? And that's why it's important. And what does that problem mean? Well, that's different depending on the perspective, right? You have the customer where they care about downtime, right? So they need things to work smoothly, and then the team running it itself, you want it to run smoothly. You want it, but beyond that, you want to be able to. I was reading an article which I think I'll talk about later from the folks at Optum, how they kind of put together observability, is they cared a lot about mean time to repair. Right. So one of their metrics or KPIs was mean time to repair, and observability was a way for them to reduce the MTTR.
Gotcha.
And so from the team's perspective, right, you want this well-oiled machine. You've worked hard at it. Kubernetes is complicated, but when something goes wrong, and it will go wrong, right, observability is a way to be able to pinpoint and reduce those repairs. And then I think there's a third one, which probably doesn't come up as much, is sort of stakeholders, right, in your company, right? Observability also gives you a way to give snapshots of the health or kind of what's going on in a system that you could give to an executive, right, internally, right? So there's that big part of it that doesn't get talked about as much, but it does. It is an absolute use case, I think, for the actual internal perspective.
No, I think for sure, right? And to tie into your point that it helps with reporting as well. The new thing that we have seen, or at least I have seen recently, is people also talking about cost management and reducing costs.
Yeah.
Under the observability umbrella, like it's like figuring out what different components of your stack are costing how much money, and then trying to help you optimize it. Cost definitely is a major concern for everyone building anything today. So
that whole part of the CNCF landscape, which is a newer one, which we see a lot of the cube costs and things like that, is what is it called? Continuous optimization, right?
Yep.
A lot can fall under there. I mean, even one we didn't talk about yet is chaos engineering also falls into, because at the end of the day, all of these sort of use cases for in this realm all fall back to being able to observe and use metrics and use what you're monitoring to be able to do something more interesting, right? It's definitely one of those things that can that can easily blow up into a lot of other topics, which we'll cover some of them a little bit. But I did want to go back to another metaphor since we're on metaphor.
Okay, let's do it.
Right, I kind of think about sort of an engine, right? Being the bike dude that I am, but I think of all these metrics and traces and everything as sort of the fluids and everything that flowing through an engine, through a system, and you need to be able to understand that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? All of a sudden, if your car doesn't drive over 30 miles an hour, but you got pedal to the metal, something's wrong. You need to know why, right? So at the end of the day, there's so many like these types of metaphors, right? Kubernetes is our engine in many cases, and you're kind of taking techniques of being able to look at parts of that and from various perspectives, and all these different tools will help you get there. So that's
I love that metaphor. Like like you're trying to go as fast as you can, but you really can't because something is wrong. Let's figure out what.
Awesome. Anyway, so DevOps teams can benefit a lot from having these, and I think that we can move on to maybe you had a topic about 3 pillars of observability that is an obvious next step of like, hey, if I'm going to start down this journey, where should I focus first?
I think I know we have already referred to these 3 things, like logs, metrics, and traces. Like those are, I would say, like 3 pillars of observability, and I'm sure like the entire community would say that too or support that too. So logs, basically, I don't think I need to introduce the concept of what log is or logging is, but having a system that can help you collect these logs consists of messages that are generated by different application components, different infrastructure component over a precise period of time, can help you tell a story of what's actually happening. So this can include things like logs that your different application components are generating, like MongoDB or your Nginx or whatever you're using in your application tier, logs that are being generated from that. It can also include things like Kubernetes cluster component logs. So what are your nodes saying? What is kubelet saying? If you have a security tool or a storage layer, what are those logs telling you? And then Kubernetes audit logs, right? Like just this ties into like not just the performance, but also security, like who's trying to access that system, which components are trying to access each other. Just figuring out all of those things using logs will be definitely helpful.
Yeah, and I think the one thing to keep in mind, or a couple of things to keep in mind with logs, is the whole garbage in, garbage out rule. Logs have to be useful information, right? And having logs set to the appropriate level as well, right? If you have the most basic level, you're not getting a lot out of it. If you have too much, then it's hard to search, right? Also, logs is just it's mostly text, right? So things like OpenSearch and those kind of tools will are absolutely fundamental on
Mhm.
being able to find useful data out of logs, right? Seeing
True.
patterns and those kind of things. So search and garbage in, garbage out, I think, are big things to think about when collecting logs. Like kubectl logs, your
Oh,
pod is useful, but again, it's only what's getting put out by the application.
that's true. So I think I think later in the episode, right, we'll also talk about like observability driven development, and I know you have that bullet point. So this
Yes,
definitely fits into that story, like garbage in, garbage out. If you're not thinking about logs in the right way,
exactly.
they won't be as helpful. So true. The next pillar, I think it's metrics, right?
Yep.
Metrics consist of like the time series component or time series data that describe like how your resource utilization or how a specific component is behaving.
Yeah.
Like it helps people get insights into the health of a system, especially. So like
Yeah.
instead of looking at just log for a specific component or a metrics for a specific component at point in a time snapshot, you're looking at metrics across different components, and you're looking at it across, let's say, a day or a month or a year, and figuring out trends and things that you see that needs to be fixed. I think that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, and a really common example, right, that everybody pretty much these days that has any kind of smartphone will deal with is just like load times is a great metric, right?
Yeah.
So you hit enter or submit on your phone or keyboard, that call goes off, makes a request, and could hit in the Kubernetes world could hit many different
Hmm.
containers, microservices,
Yeah.
and each one of those calls can be a metric. How long is it taking to respond? If
Hmm.
if you see a trend and all of a sudden it's spiked, maybe something else is happening. There's a bottleneck. So those are sort of the metrics, and I just bring that up as an example, just because it's a common one, very used and easier to understand. If your website is loading really slow, people get pissed.
I think that's perfect. Like that's a perfect segue into the next thing, like traces, right? Like these are these unique IDs for individual requests. So let's say Ryan is trying to access an app and it's really long. You can actually look at tracing information for each specific request and map it throughout your system and identify bottlenecks as these requests go from one component to another. Maybe the CDN that you're using is not the best. Like you don't have to worry about anything on your own infrastructure. Maybe the CDN is fixed and you need to buy more bandwidth. That's
Yep.
the answer. Or maybe you need to fix a component and increase the queue size for some specific component, and maybe that will help. But having tracing implemented would really help you isolate these individual request calls throughout your system and help you identify these bottlenecks.
And this kind of bleeds into, like, you might be able to trace it to a specific microservice, but then there's traces within that application itself,
Yeah.
right? So what in that application could be part of an algorithm or a function, and something that could be slowing things down, and sort of traces are sort of used is sort of in parallel. From a system perspective, there's a trace, and then there's sort of a code traceability as well. So the term used I think both ways, but useful in this scenario either way.
True. And I think like next thing was like, okay, the three pillars is done. But then as you have been clearly pointing out, like if you can't visualize all of
Yeah,
these things, it's not really helpful. Like again, the log, garbage in, garbage out, metrics and tracing information, if you don't have a good UI to help you monitor all of these,
right.
it's just information that you have which is not being used. So do you want to talk about how visualization is important? And
Yeah, sure. So I think the one that many people will be familiar with is Grafana.
yep.
So especially in the Kubernetes ecosystem, Prometheus, Grafana are sort of a de facto standard in many ways of open source tooling,
Yep.
and are super useful, right? Prometheus helps you kind of collect from different endpoints in your cluster, whether that be the cluster itself, applications. But then you have to do something to visualize it. You can point Grafana at Prometheus as a data source, and then do all sorts of interesting things.
Yeah.
That being said, having Grafana just visualize something like how many requests are coming in
Yeah.
is only so useful, right? There's a specific example I was thinking back to where I think we were monitoring like um, requests happening within Ceph from like an open
Yeah.
stack dashboard back in the day or something
Nice.
like that, and the difference of having a useful you know dashboard for this piece that we were looking at was really just a matter of how we dissected the actual data we were ingesting from Prometheus. That being said, if it was like a request, well, we actually needed to view it over a certain amount of time. So we needed to kind of slice it by what's happening in the last 30 minutes
Yeah.
and looking at a very specific thing. So you have to really think about what you want to monitor.
Mm-hmm.
And I see dashboard examples all the time that give like a few, charts and things like that for a huge system. The reality is a lot of people that are doing these kind of things and have it be really useful is they have a full dashboard for one component.
Yeah.
Right. So like every component or every microservice has its own dashboard. Like there's no magic bullet where you have one thing to look at and
Yeah.
can see everything. So you really got to kind of double click and get fine grained with those things. And there's a lot of tools out there, right? Grafana is one of them. Open Dashboard is one of them, which if people are familiar with the Elk stack, it's just like AWS's forked open source version of it. But the Elk stack is also right if you're used to Kibana, those kind of things. These are all ways you can visualize different types of metrics and traces and logs as well.
Awesome. I think as the next part, next question, I want to talk about like just the different options that are available for users that are maybe new to observability, trying to interpret the CNCF landscape, which is a complicated one, and see like what are the tools that they can get started for free on their own with a good community support. And I think
start with Prometheus and Grafana, right? I think that's a no-brainer. And something I have a bullet point here that I just didn't realize is alerts is a big part of this observability landscape too. I think it falls a little outside of. No, I don't know. Does it fall outside of observability? I mean, so basically, alerts are just taking the ability to have sort of like literally an alert, like a text or an SMS or an email, that kind of thing, pop up if one of your observability metrics or kind of rules that you create say if load times go over this, right, that's constantly monitoring, you don't have to look at it all the time, right? Dashboard, you don't want to sit there and stare at it, right? And so that's another big part of it. But Prometheus has very good integrations with that. It has works well with Grafana. They're both open. They work really well with Kubernetes. They're, I would say, fairly novice in terms of like being able to install and get going. I think it's a perfect spot to start. There are a ton of tools though, right? When you go beyond that, I think those are the de facto standards and a great great part to start with. But we'll also link to the CNCF landscape part of observability, and you'll see yourself, right? You'll start asking. But I know you have Thanos and Cortex and some of the other ones on here that you want to talk about those.
Yeah, and I think I don't manage infrastructure at scale, right? I'm like, okay, I'll deploy my own Kubernetes cluster, do things, delete it, that's it. I don't even have like long running clusters, but I've always deployed Prometheus and Grafana, and I've thought like, okay, that's enough, like I don't need more tooling. But what I've realized after doing research for this episode is Prometheus is like single cluster. There is no way to have a Prometheus deployment or have Prometheus understand that it can talk to different Kubernetes clusters. You have a Prometheus endpoint on each. It's also hard to retain data for longer periods. Like right now, the default is 15 days, which I'm sure like most of the people might just be setting that and not.
Retention is tough, right? I mean, you could easily blow some kind of quota you have on when you're pulling in logs and all this stuff, right? It can get quite extensive.
And I think that's where the open source community came together and have built projects like Thanos and Cortex. So both of these are open source, part of the CNCF community, but they give you highly available Prometheus, like talking about Thanos specifically, they give you highly available Prometheus setup with longer term storage capabilities. So it is based on Prometheus, still uses PromQL, it still uses all the core components of Prometheus, but it gives you the ability to store more than 15 days worth of data. It gives you the ability to talk to multiple Kubernetes clusters through their individual Prometheus endpoints and give you a global query overview. So if you're mapping out or creating new dashboards in Grafana, you can actually point it to a Thanos instance and actually have dashboards that show you information from multiple Kubernetes clusters instead of just talking to Prometheus and giving you that one single. So it helps you with a global query view as well. And then Cortex is something similar, like horizontally scalable, highly available, multi-tenant with longer term storage. I think the only thing is like it's still in incubation phases, and it uses like it can. I think vendors like AWS are already using it for their managed Prometheus services. So they're using all of these benefits and offering it as a service to the customer.
Yeah, and that's a good point on
Mhm.
scale, right? You'll have to think a little bit differently on these tools,
Yeah.
but many of them do support these kind of things. I think Prometheus itself, you can actually target other Prometheuses, so you can have like one Prometheus point at other
Oh,
Prometheuses for a data source. I mean, these other tools probably make it easier, but I believe that is also the case.
gotcha.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think beyond just the sort of standard monitoring tools,
Mhm.
we haven't even talked about tools that do things like logging or tracing, right? Some of the ones that people might be familiar with, Splunk is a very big name in
Yeah.
the ecosystem that's very good at logging. Even just using something like the Elk Stack with Fluentd, collect or
Mhm.
Logstash, that whole thing where you basically have a daemon or an application, a small application running near or on a node or
Yep.
near an application that's collecting all the logs and sending them somewhere else. It's kind of like its sole purpose to do that efficiently, right? But then you have an aggregation point, and then you have sort of a visualization and search point. I think like logs in terms of architecture is definitely something fairly straightforward. That being said, scale again comes into play.
Mhm.
Applications and systems put out a ton of logs, so you can easily fill up some bandwidth.
Yeah.
You might be able, you want to think about how much is coming out. You might need to limit it. You might need to change logging levels. Those kind of things. You might fill up your Kibana dashboard quite quickly and get overwhelmed. But definitely something to think about at scale.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I like about Fluentd, right? I know you said like daemon set and things like that, but it allows you to talk to any data source. It has a universal language, but then it allows you to take inputs from any type of data or any data source and then translate it into any destination as well. So you can have
Yeah,
Apache logs going to MongoDB
yeah,
or Elasticsearch or both at the same time. Like it can also help you with routing these, how your logs are actually being translated from the source, different sources to different destinations. It also like helps you store things locally. So I know this is running on Kubernetes as a daemon set. If the pod goes down for Fluentd, you don't have to worry about losing access to all your logs. It stores it in a PVC by default, and then you can also configure it to push things to a remote repository, and then can be deployed in an HA configuration. So Fluentd definitely is the cornerstone of logging when it comes to Kubernetes.
yeah, absolutely. And there are a bunch out there, but go look for yourself. We're not going to cover them all in this podcast. I'll put a link to them. And I think tracing we can cover a little bit. You had Jaeger in here. Am I
Yep.
saying that? Jaeger.
I think that's the
Very good.
preferred CNCF solution as well. Completely open source, helps with end-to-end distributed tracing. It can help you visualize the chain of events between microservices, components, helps you interpret the interactions that are happening, perform or help you perform root cause analysis and service dependency analysis as well. So Jaeger is a tool when if you want to start thinking about tracing.
Sidebar: the Jaeger logo is pretty cool. It's obviously, so it's a gopher, which how it's like
Yeah.
very CNCF-y. But he's looking at footprints and like investigating. But
Oh,
I always thought he like as tracing, like I'm following these things. But I always thought he looks angry, like
yeah.
who put these dirty feet on my floor? But I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be investigating because he's got the whole hat on and stuff. But
I never put that together. It's just a cute logo, but that makes more sense.
you tell me. Maybe it's just me who thinks he just looks angry at the feet, but like someone's putting it on his carpet or
Yeah.
something. But yeah, go take a look at those. We won't spend a lot of time on the individual tools. We
Yeah.
talked about chaos engineering and continuous optimization as well. These are things like Chaos Mesh, Chaos Cube, Chaos Toolkit, which are all about introducing sort of literally the chaos into the cluster so that you can see how your system reacts.
Yeah.
And a big part of the reason that it's part of observability is because you introduce these chaos mechanisms where it will maybe spin up a ton of
Mhm.
pods or those kind of introduce some errors. You
Start
want to
deleting
also see
pods.
how your observability stack
Yeah.
negotiates, viewing what's going on from your sort of tracing and monitoring
Mhm.
capabilities, right? So
Like, to be
testing
honest,
that all.
when I heard about Thanos for the first time a few years back, I was like, that's a chaos engineering tool, right? Like with the whole like
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, with the naming of it,
yeah.
yeah.
But nope, it is a metrics tool, not chaos engineering.
uh,
Come on, man.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then Optimization also includes, right, the kubectl open cost, which we spoke to and had kubectl on and on the show, but also kind of goes through how to use metrics to manage things like, the whole Black Friday, scaling issue where scale ops and crane and those kind of things can do more interesting things beyond just cost. I mean, cost is a big part of it, but as you use metrics, you can do interesting things like you can kind of start to predict some things that cast AI. So really cool things I think are going to happen in that continuous optimization space.
No,
keep
I
an
like
eye on that, right?
How
but again, the core tenet is having all this observability stuff anyway. So.
No, I was just saying, like, I like how it's called continuous optimization. They've kept it generic and not continuous cost optimization, because again, cost is definitely a major component of it. But if you don't have your applications right sized, you will have these performance issues. So it's all about like figuring things out and updating things as it goes. So at the end of the day, optimizing things.
Yeah. Cool. So I wanted to make sure we get to these other related topics we had and our ChatGPT question. Which is the idea of observability engineering or I think they're kind of synonymous, but observability driven development. What's your thought?
So like I think this is adding too many things on the developers personally. Like shift left, security. They have to think about security. They have to think about observability. Yeah, I know. It definitely is putting a lot of pressure on them. But this is just the idea that if you're building applications, you should think about observability from day 0 or day -1. Make it part of requirements. Think about the bigger picture when you're starting small. As we said, right? Like if your application components are not spitting out the right logs at the right level, they are useless. So when you're building your apps, when you're implementing logging in those components, it definitely helps to keep observability in mind. That's my
and I think a big part of it is just making sure that the development side of things is aware of what's being observed in production.
Okay.
Right. So using sort of the what, when, and how things are happening in production to influence development. Right. So like
a feedback loop.
Yeah, like a feedback loop. Right. I think there's that part of it, the mindset of it as well, of like, hey, I'm going to develop code that aids well for tracing and logging, those kind of things. But feedback loop, being able to have your developers as a stakeholder to your observability stack, right? Having them be able to understand or be presented to, or whatever it may be, hopefully make it low touch for them or low effort, I should say, to consume that information, but be able to say, oh, hey, we're seeing this, so maybe we take a look at improving this kind of thing, those kind of things. So I think it's great. I think it can be overdone in terms of how much is put on the development side of things, but I think it's crucial done as again, just like another feedback loop to for those teams to kind of consider. Cool. I think we're almost near the hour mark, so I think we're gonna stop here in terms of diving into observability. That being said, we know we didn't touch everything. We know we didn't go into a lot of detail on certain things, but that's sort of on purpose. We're giving a brief sort of overview 101 to observability in the Kubernetes space, and maybe some of the things you'd want to consider and look at. Hopefully that was something useful to you. Let us know if you like these kind of episodes, and we'll dive into having some guests on in this space. But before we leave you, we do have a ChatGPT question. Should we do the short one or the long one?
Let's do the short one.
All right. The short one is, we asked ChatGPT, if observability was a superhero, who would it be? And now I expected ChatGPT to tell me a specific real superhero that I would understand, but it just was like, nope, I'm not gonna pick one. I'm gonna make one.
Nice.
Unless this one, unless it is one. But it said if observability were a superhero, it would be named Monitor Master. So it made one. It created, it doesn't have the best ring to it. It's a little tactical, but so I was thinking it would just like take an example from the world. But it said this superhero would possess the power to see through the complexities of distributed systems and cloud native environments. Sure, if everything is running smoothly and efficiently, with its superhuman ability to collect, analyze, and visualize the data from various sources. So I guess this superhero can do all these things itself. Who knows?
Yeah. If ChatGPT is I don't know, drawing outside the lines and coming up with superhero, I think the way I would answer this is just like, I don't know, observability for me is not a superhero. It's the villain, I guess, the Riddler from the Batman series. Like always asking riddles or asking questions. Like, what's wrong? That's my answer. It's a lame answer though.
Yeah, so it kind of goes on and says, just like a superhero swooping in to save the day, Monitor Master would provide insights and recommend help to teams to maintain their app. So it was a pretty like take the topic and out there and then create this name Monitor Master, which is definitely things we hear at the Kubernetes. Because I don't know, I was a little let down by you, GPT 3.5. I think this was. I was hoping it would pick an actual superhero, but all good. But yeah, I think so. We have some fun episodes coming up soon. Again, come join our Slack. Suggest episodes in there if you haven't joined it. We'll put the link in the show notes again. Introduce yourself, suggest episodes, give us feedback, talk to us, whatever. Ask questions. We'd love to have you there, and we'll see you soon on some new episodes. But that brings us to the end of today's episode. I'm Ryan.
I'm Bhavin.
Thanks for joining another episode of Kubernetes Bytes. Thank you for listening to the Kubernetes Bytes podcast.